So it is possible that any evidence of that structure might be out here in the water.
Yeah, this is awesome. Okay, I can't wait to get on the bottom and get my eyes on it.
Oak Island's 230-year-old treasure hunt may finally be approaching the breakthrough Rick and Marty Lagina have been waiting for. After years of drilling, boreholes, and underground scanning, the team has detected a massive target beneath the island, one that could completely change the direction of the search. This time, the clues are far more intriguing than another piece of old wood or a small metal fragment. Investigators are examining signs of unusual soil layers, possible tunnels, metal responses, and what may be an underground void. Together, these clues have raised one explosive possibility: a sealed chamber hidden deep beneath Oak Island. And if that chamber really exists, the treasure inside could be worth nearly $408 million. But is this finally the discovery generations of treasure hunters have been waiting for? Or just another mystery buried beneath Oak Island? Stay with us until the end, because we're going to break down the evidence, the underground target, and what could be hiding below. And if you enjoy mysterious discoveries like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss the next big revelation. For more than 2 centuries, Oak Island has produced strange discoveries, but Rick and Marty Lagina have learned to expect almost anything beneath its surface. From fragments of old wood and pieces of metal to unusual layers of soil and unexplained underground signals, every new clue has added another chapter to the mystery. But this time, something different has captured the team's attention. Underground scans have identified a large area where the density appears noticeably different from the surrounding ground. Even more interesting, the signal seems to have recognizable boundaries rather than appearing completely random, suggesting that a different material or structure could be present below. At the center of this anomaly, there also appears to be a possible void or empty space, raising an even bigger question: what exactly is buried down there? One explanation is that the anomaly is completely natural. Oak Island contains complex layers of rock, clay, and soil, so unusual geological formations are nothing new. Another possibility is that the team has encountered one of the countless tunnels or shafts dug by previous treasure hunters during the island's 230-year history. But there is a third possibility, and this is the one that has captured everyone's imagination. What if the anomaly is actually part of a man-made underground structure? If future drilling uncovers old timber, carefully placed stones, construction material, an empty cavity, or even a metal signal at the same depth, the possibility of a hidden structure would become much harder to ignore. And that's where the massive $408 million treasure theory enters the picture. If a large sealed chamber really is hidden beneath the island, Rick and Marty could be closer than ever to the discovery that treasure hunters have pursued for generations. But what would such a chamber actually look like? When the underground data is examined more closely, the mystery becomes less about whether something is present and more about whether someone intentionally constructed it. The surrounding area appears denser, while the center may contain a hollow or void. If that interpretation is accurate, it could resemble an underground room, passage, or sealed chamber surrounded by stronger material. However, a scan alone cannot prove that humans built anything there. A collapsed tunnel, buried debris, or unusual geological formation could create a similar signal. That is why drilling remains so important. If boreholes in the same area bring up old timber, worked stones, construction debris, or evidence of an empty cavity, the entire investigation could take a dramatic turn. And that leads to another fascinating question. Why would anyone build a chamber so deep beneath the island in the first place. Simply hiding something underground would have been difficult enough, but constructing a reinforced space and then sealing it completely would have required enormous effort. If someone went to such lengths, perhaps they were protecting something they considered extremely valuable. That possibility is what makes the $408 million gold treasure theory so compelling. Could the chamber contain gold, ancient coins, or another historical treasure? But then another clue enters the story. Old wood recovered from a borehole. On Oak Island, underground scans can suggest where something might be located, but drilling provides something much more valuable: physical evidence from the ground itself. That is why every borehole matters. Imagine the team drilling through ordinary soil, clay, and rock as expected. Then, as the drill approaches the suspected target depth, the material suddenly begins to change. As the drilling continues, the material coming from underground begins to look increasingly unusual. Instead of only natural layers, the cores may contain old timber, different types of clay, small stones, and other material that appears noticeably different from the surrounding ground. One isolated borehole could easily be explained as coincidence, but if multiple holes drilled in separate locations begin producing similar material at roughly the same depth, the situation becomes much harder to dismiss. Repeatedly finding wood and disturbed soil along one underground level could indicate that the drill is passing through an old shaft, tunnel, or wooden construction. And when those findings are combined with scans showing a possible void and defined boundaries at approximately the same depth, several independent clues begin pointing toward the possibility of a single hidden feature. That is where the $408 million treasure theory becomes even more intriguing. Could the recovered wood belong to an abandoned searcher tunnel? Could the stones be remnants of a collapsed structure? Or could the drilling be approaching the outer edge of a deliberately constructed chamber, designed to conceal something valuable? At the same time, caution is essential. Old wood alone cannot prove that gold is nearby. Researchers would need to determine its age through carbon dating, identify the type of wood, examine any cut marks or signs of human processing, and scientifically analyze the surrounding material. If those tests showed that the timber existed before the known searcher activity, the implications would become far more significant. The mystery would then shift from simply asking whether something exists underground to asking whether that structure could be connected to Oak Island's legendary money pit. For more than 2 centuries, the money pit has remained at the heart of the island's mystery. Since 1795, generations of treasure hunters have attempted to uncover whatever secret may have been buried beneath the area. So whenever a new underground anomaly appears, Rick and Marty Lagina face one crucial question. Could this discovery somehow connect back to the money pit? To answer that, the exact position, depth, and direction of the anomaly become critical. If the suspected structure sits near the same level where earlier excavations uncovered unusual shafts, tunnels, or materials, the team can begin mapping its possible route. And if that route appears to move toward the money pit, the significance of the discovery could increase dramatically. However, there is a major complication. The money pit region has been excavated repeatedly for more than 200 years, leaving behind a complicated underground maze of shafts, tunnels, collapsed sections, water-filled passages, and disturbed ground. Some of these old workings are poorly documented or difficult to locate precisely. That means a tunnel-shaped signal cannot automatically be identified as the original treasure route. Yet there is another possibility that makes the investigation even more fascinating. What if the newly detected feature has nothing to do with later treasure hunters? What if it represents an original underground passage created before 1795, perhaps designed to lead toward a sealed chamber? If successive boreholes continue revealing old timber, disturbed soil, stones, and possible cavities along the same path, the team could potentially begin following that underground route piece by piece. And then comes another clue that could completely change the atmosphere around the discovery: metal. If the scans are already indicating a possible enclosed space, the boreholes are producing old wood and unusual soil, and a recurring metallic response is appearing around the same target, it is easy to understand why the team would become extremely interested. Naturally, the biggest question would be whether that metal could actually be connected to the legendary treasure, with theories placing the potential value as high as $408 million. Even a strong metallic signal can sound extraordinary. But a metal response by itself is not evidence of gold. Iron, copper, lead, silver, and countless other metallic objects can produce similar readings. Given the enormous amount of excavation that has taken place on Oak Island, the signal could just as easily come from old nails, tools, chains, pipes, drilling equipment, or other objects abandoned by previous searchers. So it would be impossible to declare a $408 million gold discovery based on a single reading. The situation becomes far more compelling, however, if the metallic response repeatedly appears around the same suspected chamber, rather than in random locations. Picture the evidence coming together from 3 different directions. Underground scans reveal a defined anomaly and possible void. Boreholes at a similar depth recover old timber, clay, and disturbed material, and a separate survey detects metal in that same zone. If repeated scans from different angles continue placing the response in precisely the same location, the target would become increasingly difficult to ignore. At that point, the team would have to determine what the metal actually represents. Could it be old iron equipment? Could it be tools or materials left behind by earlier searchers? Or could something far more significant be buried inside the suspected chamber? The biggest question now is whether that suspected sealed space could actually contain valuable materials such as coins, silver, or gold. But there is only one way to find out for certain. The team would have to reach the target safely, recover whatever is inside, and subject the material to detailed scientific testing. That brings us to the most eye-catching number in this entire mystery: $408 million. Where did that figure actually come from? And how could an underground chamber on Oak Island possibly be associated with such an enormous value? First, one important distinction has to be made. The $408 million figure is not a confirmed valuation of treasure that has been recovered. Until a chamber is opened and its contents are identified, weighed, and tested for purity, the number remains a theoretical estimate rather than an established fact. The calculation would begin with an estimated size for the suspected chamber based on underground scans and borehole information. If researchers could determine its approximate length, width, and height, they could calculate the total volume of the space. From there, several hypothetical scenarios could be created. What if only a small portion of that space contained gold? What if it held large quantities of coins, bars, silver, or other valuable metals? By estimating the possible amount of gold, converting that quantity into weight, and then applying a market price, a theoretical value could potentially rise into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Under an especially optimistic scenario, a figure such as $408 million could emerge, But there is a major reason to remain cautious. A large underground chamber does not automatically mean that it is packed with gold. It could contain only a handful of coins, empty containers, silver, other metals, historical objects, or absolutely nothing of financial value. Even if gold were eventually discovered, its purity and condition would affect its value significantly. And the costs associated with recovering such a discovery could be enormous as well, including excavation, specialized machinery, engineering, groundwater management, security, archaeological examination, and conservation. In other words, a theoretical gross value of $408 million would be very different from the amount anyone could actually take home. Still, the number captures the imagination, because if the team ever reaches the suspected chamber and discovers a substantial quantity of gold, the mystery would immediately move to an even bigger question. Who put it there? If a sealed chamber really does exist beneath Oak Island and contains a significant collection of gold or historical treasure, identifying its original owner could be even more important than determining its monetary value. That question has kept the island's mystery alive for more than 230 years. Countless theories have emerged over the generations, but none has been conclusively proven. One of the most famous possibilities involves the Knights Templar. According to the theory, the Templars may have transported valuable treasures, religious artifacts, or important documents to a remote location where they could remain hidden and protected. If the suspected chamber were to produce unusually old European objects or symbols associated with the Templar era, the theory would almost certainly receive renewed attention. Another possibility points toward pirates. Given the long history of piracy along the Atlantic coast, some have suggested that pirates could have buried stolen gold, silver, or coins somewhere on Oak Island. In that scenario, the dates and origins of any recovered coins would become extremely important clues. Then there is the possibility of a connection to Spanish explorers and maritime expeditions. During the height of the Spanish Empire, ships crossing the Atlantic transported enormous quantities of gold and silver. Discovering Spanish coins, ceramics, or other artifacts inside the suspected chamber could therefore send the investigation in an entirely different direction. And beyond these theories, there are also possibilities involving British military activity, French connections, and other historical groups whose movements across the Atlantic could potentially intersect with Oak Island's unexplained past. Over the years, theories have also pointed toward colonial-era groups and other historical players who may have had reasons to hide something on the island. But if a major discovery is eventually made, the answer may not come from a giant treasure chest or an obvious piece of gold. Sometimes, the smallest object can provide the most important clue. A single coin, a fragment of timber, an old tool, a piece of pottery, or a distinctive insignia could completely change the interpretation of Oak Island's past. Scientific testing would then become crucial. Carbon dating could help establish when a piece of wood was used or placed underground. The chemical composition of a metal tool could reveal where it was manufactured or what period it belongs to. And if a coin carries a date, symbol, or ruler's name, it could potentially connect the discovery to a specific country and historical period. But there is another major problem that has complicated the Oak Island investigation for generations. How do you separate the original evidence from everything that later treasure hunters left behind? Since the first major treasure hunt began in 1795, the island has been repeatedly excavated for nearly 230 years. Searchers have dug shafts, constructed tunnels, drilled boreholes, reopened old areas, and sometimes disturbed the same ground multiple times. As a result, the underground landscape today is anything but a simple archaeological site. Instead, it may be a complex maze created by centuries of excavation, collapse, flooding, and reconstruction. This makes interpreting a possible $408 million discovery much more difficult. Imagine that a borehole suddenly brings up a piece of old timber. At first, the discovery might seem incredibly significant because the wood could have formed part of an ancient tunnel, shaft, or chamber. But there is another possibility. Perhaps the timber was installed by treasure hunters in the 19th or 20th century to support one of their own excavations. Determining which explanation is correct could completely change the meaning of the evidence. The same problem applies to underground voids and metal signals. An apparent empty space could represent a genuine sealed chamber, but it could just as easily be the remains of a collapsed searcher shaft. A metallic response might indicate buried treasure, but it could also come from old drilling equipment, chains, pipes, nails, tools, or other objects abandoned during previous expeditions. That means Rick and Marty's team cannot simply examine each clue in isolation. They have to reconstruct the history behind every discovery. This is where scientific dating becomes especially valuable. If timber is recovered, researchers can determine its approximate age and establish whether it predates the beginning of the treasure hunt in 1795 or is more likely connected to later excavation activity. Specialists can also identify the wood species, examine cut marks, and study how the material appears to have been used. At the same time, historical maps, excavation records, and old depth measurements can be compared with modern drilling data. If the newly detected target sits exactly where an old searcher shaft was documented, that could explain part of the anomaly. But if the suspected structure appears at a depth and location where historical records show no previous excavation, the discovery could become considerably more intriguing. And even if the team succeeds in locating the suspected $408 million treasure zone, another question remains: can they actually reach it safely? Imagine that Rick and Marty Lagina's team has identified a promising underground target. The scans appear to indicate a defined anomaly. Boreholes are converging toward the same area, and several nearby clues seem consistent with the possibility of a chamber. From the outside, it might sound simple: dig down, reach the target, and recover whatever is inside. But underground, the reality is far more complicated. In fact, safely reaching the target could prove more difficult than identifying it in the first place. One of the biggest threats is groundwater. Oak Island's underground environment can be extremely challenging, especially as excavation moves deeper. Water can weaken soil, turn ground into unstable mud, and quickly fill areas that have been opened. If drilling or excavation breaks into an old flooded tunnel or shaft, water and sediment could suddenly move into the work area. Powerful pumps can help control the water, but underground conditions can change quickly, and one incorrect assessment could bring the operation to a halt.